Hello everyone. Now I have to tell you, this is the second time I'm doing this presentation today.
Wh-
Uh, a user group in the United States asked me to do the same, well, a version of the same thing. What I did for them was shorter. We have a little more time to work with now, so what we're doing now is longer. But basically, everybody's going to get the backup story today. And for those of you from the Naples Mug, if you took my class, whatever it was, a month or two ago on backing up your Mac, this is going to be a review. I don't have new things to tell you, but I took the sort of shorter version of the talk I did this morning, and I incorporated some of the additional things from my backups class into this since we have a little more time to work with. So you get bonus material. So everyone is welcome. I'm happy to have you all here, and we're going to talk all about Mac backups. I want to say I won't be talking about backing up your iPhone or iPad today. That's the thing you should also do. That's very important. But we only have so much time, and we have to draw the line somewhere. So we're going to be talking all Mac today. All right. Allow me to share my screen, and here we go. Do a little bit of rearranging here. Um, so I wanted to just say hi. Here I am. This is our topic. I'm sure that most of you know me. Most of you have seen one or many of my talks before. And of course, you're familiar with Take Control books. But if you're not, hi, welcome. And I run a publishing company called Take Control Books. We've been at this for almost 21 years. Publish ebooks on a lot of technical topics. Many of them are specifically Apple focused, including the one that I'll be talking about today. You can use that coupon code on your screen to save 30% on any purchase. And I hope you'll come back again and again and again and keep buying books at that lovely 30% discount. We've got about 51 books in our catalog as of today, but oh boy, I'm editing a new book by Jeff Carlson that's going to be coming out soon that I'm really excited about. Glenn Fleischman's working on a new book that's going to be different and cool. And I have quite a few books of my own lined up for later on this year. So the catalog is always growing. All right. Since we've got our pre-roll commercial, our ad out of the way, let's get into this. Uh, it astonishes me somewhat that in the year 2024, I still have to explain to people why they should back up their Mac, because as you have seen, a lot of people just don't. And I've talked to many, many people about backups, and a lot of people have kind of said, I'm never going to lose any data. Well, you know, I used to think the same thing. And then I lost some data. I'll talk about that in a minute. But boy, if you have been fortunate in your experience as a Mac user to never lose data, that's great, but also you are computing on borrowed time. It is going to happen to you sooner or later. What kinds of things do you have to worry about? Well, hardware breaks. Sometimes there's a bug or a manufacturing defect or something just wears out. You can't count on your Mac that's working so brilliantly today to keep doing that forever. Software has bugs. Sometimes the bug fixes have bugs. Some of those bugs can lead to data loss. Even though most of your software is pretty solid, most of the time things can and do go wrong. And if you decide, hey, I'm going to store most of my stuff or my most important stuff in the cloud instead of or in addition to on my Mac, okay, that's fine. But cloud services have outages too. Cloud services sometimes lose your data. Yes, this can even happen to Apple. So that's not quite good enough. Do you have a pet that might walk across your keyboard at an inopportune time? Do you have a child or grandchild who might, uh, knock your laptop off your lap and break it, as has happened to me. Stuff happens with family members and animals, and then there's human beings. And I gotta just say, in all of the worlds that I have visited across the galaxy, human beings are definitely the worst sentient species I have ever encountered. Humans, they're just the worst. Luckily, Earthlings seem to be on a fast track to eliminating that threat. But in the meantime, there are people who are not kind. There are people who might be interested in stealing your data or the devices that your data is stored on, or extorting, you for money, or just making mischief. So a lot of this kind of thing has to happen, unfortunately, and so you want to guard against that. But the very, very biggest threat is you. That's because you, if you are anything like me, and I'm going to guess that you are at least enough like me that you sometimes make mistakes. I have personally deleted stuff, sometimes occasionally, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, that I later realized, oh, I shouldn't have deleted that. And I need that thing and it's gone now. So, whether it's deleting part of a file that you're still working on, or deleting an entire file or an entire folder, or accidentally reformatting a drive that contained important data, or whatever the thing may be, you can't always trust yourself. Long and short of it is, stuff goes wrong, and backups protect you and your valuable data against stuff going wrong. Now, I was not always so enthusiastic about backups. When I got my first Mac, it was a Mac SE with a 20 megabyte, 20 megabyte hard drive. 20 megabytes. Wow, what am I going to do with all this space? But boy, got to back this thing up. And so backing up that Mac with a 20 megabyte hard drive took this big old stack of floppy disks, and it just took forever. It was such a pain. So I got a newer Mac with a bigger hard drive, and I'm just like, I've never needed anything for my backups. It's too much effort, not worth it. So I'm just not going to bother. Then I sent a fan letter to a celebrity, and this celebrity sent me an email back. And I was so excited. I got a personal email from a celebrity. Isn't that great? I didn't bother to print it out or anything. I just had it in my email program. And then my hard drive crashed and I lost all the data on it. It was completely unrecoverable despite my best efforts. I had no backups. I had no other digital copy of not only my other stuff, but my prized possession, that email from that celebrity. That was when I decided to get the backup religion, and I researched it a lot, and I came up with a strategy. And over the years, that strategy has changed and evolved a lot, especially in the last several years. So I'll talk about my current advice about backups, but if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. So please protect your data, whether it's financial records, photographs, stuff you've written, love letters, whatever it may be, it needs to be protected. I always find that it's helpful when talking about backups to start with making sure you have a correct sort of mental image of where your stuff is and what the risks are for that stuff being in that place, because a lot of us don't really think about that anymore. People are always asking me, okay, well, I have this thing that I put in iCloud Drive. So does that mean that it's only in the cloud, or is it also on my Mac? Or exactly how does that work? What about Dropbox? And what about this and that? And there are all these different situations in which there can be some ambiguity about whether there's one copy of your data or two or many, and where exactly those pieces of data live. So let's pretend we're just going to keep this super, super simple to begin with. Let's pretend you've just got a new MacBook Air and you create a file, a document. let's just say that you have created the best, most important, most valuable document ever. It would be terrible if you lost it. But at this moment, this one document exists only on your Mac, no place else. So what can go wrong? Well, all the things I listed before: hardware problems, software problems, somebody steals it, your house burns down, lots of different things. Bugs, malware, user error, lots of different things could threaten this valuable file that is just sitting on your Mac. So that's not ideal. We don't want this. And so the next step after that is to think, well, what if instead of creating that document on my Mac, maybe I used something along the lines of Google Docs, or I used the web version of Pages, Numbers, Keynote. I use some sort of online thing where I'm in a web browser and I'm creating stuff that the data itself isn't stored on my Mac, it's stored in the cloud someplace. Well, doesn't that solve that problem? And the answer is kind of, sort of, but not completely. And also it creates new problems. So let me first say one good thing about doing this is that most of these systems that let you create stuff in the cloud, such as Google Docs and the iCloud version of Pages, have a built-in versioning system. We're going to be talking all about versioning in a few minutes. But basically what this means is that every time you save the document, or after a set period of time, it saves your file, but also remembers the older versions. So you can step back through what your document looked like 10 minutes ago and an hour ago and 2 weeks ago. That's great, because if the thing that goes wrong is that part of a file is deleted or messed up in some way, this fact that you have other versions to revert to can help address that problem. So that's very nice. The problem is that if stuff is stored only in the cloud, you are putting all of your faith in that cloud provider. Now, on the one hand, even if your data is fine, it's intact there on Google servers or Apple servers or Microsoft servers or whoever, there could be some problem that prevents you from getting at them. Maybe your computer's Wi-Fi goes out. Maybe your Wi-Fi router dies. Maybe your fiber line or your copper line or coax, or however you get to your internet provider, that goes down. Maybe your internet provider or the connection between them and the next link in the chain goes down. Maybe Apple or Google has an outage on their end. Any of those links in that chain, if they break, they will mean that despite your data being okay in the cloud, you can't get at it, and that could still be a very big problem. But also, I have heard stories that I find quite scary and depressing, where a company like Google decides, for whatever reason, that they don't want to do business with you anymore, and they shut down your account and they lock you out. Now, this could happen if you break their rules, or if somebody else hacks into your account and breaks the rules and you are unjustly accused of having done something wrong. There are lots of different things that could lead to an Apple or Google or Microsoft account or whatever being shut down or restricted, even if you didn't do anything wrong that you are aware of. So if your data only exists in the cloud, that's going to be a big problem for you. You won't be able to get at it potentially ever. All right, well, let's try another approach. What if we do both? We're going to have data both on our Mac and in the cloud. So using something like Dropbox or iCloud Drive or Microsoft OneDrive or Google Drive or any of the others, you can set up a folder on your Mac where whatever you put into that folder is on your Mac, but also it gets copied to the cloud, and all of those changes are mirrored very rapidly. So this is great. You have a copy on your Mac, you have a copy in the cloud. That should give you more protection, right? And it does. This is a good thing to do, and I do this, of course, and there's nothing wrong with doing this, but it's still not really a backup. Let me explain why. To make something a backup as opposed to just a copy, that backup has to still be there when something happens to the original. So if I use, let's just say Dropbox, and I put a file in my Dropbox, and it's on my Mac, so that's one place, and it's in Dropbox, that's the second place. But then I decide, you know what? I don't want this file anymore. I'm going to delete it from my Mac. Well, Dropbox says, hey, the file's gone from that folder, so I will delete it too. Now, with most of these services, there are ways of going back and getting files that were deleted up to, in most cases, a month. So if I realize that I've accidentally deleted something within the next month, usually there's a way to get it back. Longer than that, and I'm just out of luck. The point is, if all I do is make a copy and I make that copy in such a way that whatever happens to the original also happens to the copy, then it's not really a backup. It's only a backup if whatever I do to the original does not affect the copy. And again, there's a difference between a service letting you see earlier versions of a file and a service letting you see deleted files. Sometimes you get one or the other, not both. In both cases, there can be limitations on how far back you can get your data and what kinds of data you can get. So this is okay for what it is. It does protect you if, let's say, your Mac is stolen. It does protect you if you still have your Mac, but there's an internet outage. So that's great, but it still isn't really a backup. Now, I want to talk about one of these user error problems. One of these situations that happens when you are the person causing the problem. And that is when you accidentally or intentionally delete or alter part of a file. So I mentioned versions earlier. I want to say a bit more about that here. Mac OS for several years has had a built-in versioning mechanism. Many apps take advantage of this. For example, TextEdit, which comes with your Mac, takes advantage of this. Nicest Writer Pro, which is a word processor that we use here in the Take Control world, takes advantage of this. Microsoft Word does not. BBEdit does not. So it's up to an individual app to decide whether they want to implement this capability. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. If you are using an app that has taken advantage of this macOS feature, here's what it would look like. I've got a file. And as I continue working on this file and making changes and saving it or letting it autosave, my Mac remembers what the previous versions looked like. And I can step back through those previous versions if I need to. So let's say I'm working on this file and it's just a very, very simple file in this example, but I realize, oh, wait a minute, I made a change and I really need to see what this file looked like an hour ago before I made that change. Well, this is how you would use this feature. You would go up to your menu bar, go to the File menu, go down to Revert To, and choose Browse All Versions. When you do this, you get this kind of lovely little display. On the left, you have the document that you were working on, your current version of that document. On the right, you see reseating into the background lots of previous versions. Could be one or two, could be thousands, depending on how long you've been working on this document. So in this example, you can see that the next previous version of this document is missing a line. So that's what it looked like a few minutes ago, and on the left is what it looks like now. So I can use these arrows over here to step back to older versions of that file. Or I can go to this control on the right-hand side and just use my mouse to hover over an exact time or day. And I want, no, the version from right then, and click that. and it will show me a preview of what that version looked like. And when I get to the one I want, I can simply click the restore button, and the version that I was working on will be replaced with that old version. So that's really nice. This is handy. It's easy to use. It protects you from yourself. But I want to caution you that this also is not a backup. It's not a backup, first of all, because those versions are on your Mac. They're in the same location as the original file. So anything that happens to your Mac or to the original file is going to affect those versions too. Secondly, it doesn't work everywhere. Thirdly, it doesn't work with deleted files. In order to take advantage of this, you have to actually have the file open. If the file isn't there at all, you can't use this. So we do need something that is more than this, something that is more than just cloud storage, something that is more than just cloud sync. We do need backups as well. And I want to go over a few general principles that sort of form how I look at backups and how I would like you to look at backups. And this will inform what decisions we make about how we go about making our backups. The goal is to get to where once I've lost something, I know exactly how to restore it, and I can do that easily and quickly. If your backup strategy does not have restoration as a key component, or you don't trust it, or you don't know how it works, then that's a huge problem. Remember, a backup is a copy of your data that you can access even when the original data isn't there. If you just make a duplicate of a file and you keep it in the same place, it's nice to have, but that's not a backup. If you use any of numerous tools to sync your data between one computer and another, or between your computer and the cloud, or whatever it may be, sync is great. I love sync. I use sync all the time, but that's not a backup either, because whatever happens to the original happens to the copy as well. Well, just in my presentation earlier this morning, somebody said, yeah, but what if I have a RAID? You know, I have an enclosure with multiple hard drives in it and they're mirrored. So if I copy a file to my RAID, redundant array of independent drives, okay, if I copy a file to my RAID, then that file is on two different hard drives. So that's a backup, right? And I said, no, that's not a backup, for exactly the same reason. Whatever happens to one of those will happen to the other. They are mirrors of each other. A RAID is great because it protects you if one of those hard drives dies. That's great. You still have another copy. But that's the only thing that a RAID protects you against. It doesn't protect you against all of those other issues, user error, bugs, and all the rest. Now, a fellow this morning said, well, what I do is every day I take the files that I was working on and I copy them over onto this SSD, and then I go into that SSD and I make a copy onto another one, and I disconnect that and I put it in this place. And I'm like, oh, really? Really? You manually copy files every single day? And he's like, well, it only takes me about 5 minutes. Like, how many hours is that over the course of the year? Isn't life too short? What if you forget? What if you make a mistake? We have computers. They're so powerful. Their point is to be labor-saving devices. Let your computer do the work for you. Your computer won't forget. It'll do things invisibly in the background. It's much less likely than you are to make a mistake. Please automate your backups so that you never have to think about them. Ideally, at least one of your backups should be additive. That means I backed up my stuff yesterday. Now today, I'm going to back up the new stuff, the stuff that has changed, the new files that have been created, but I'm not going to delete the old stuff from the backup. That stuff that I backed up yesterday, it's going to stay there, all right? We want to keep adding to our backups, not replacing yesterday's copy with today's copy, because what if I need yesterday's copy? So we are talking about additive backups here, and there are other ways that we will talk about later. Sometimes a backup program, and this includes Time Machine, will say, all right, well, I have 9,000 copies of this file. I think I'm going to delete the oldest ones or things that haven't been touched in a long time, things that you clearly aren't going to need anymore. There are various ways that you can set up backup software to purge extra stuff you don't need. But in general, we want to add to our backups. One backup is way better than nothing. Two backups, even better. Three is not bad. You're going to have to invest some money. You might invest money in a cloud service, in an external SSD or an external hard drive or a NAS appliance or something. You might invest money in backup software. Believe me, however much money you put into backups, it's nothing to what it's going to cost you to lose valuable data. So one decision you're going to have to make is, do I want to use local backups or network backups? When I say local, what I mean is physically connected to your Mac. So this SSD that I will hold up probably half a dozen times has a Thunderbolt 3 connection, and this plugs directly into the Thunderbolt port on any of my Macs, and then it just mounts and I can do whatever kind of thing I need to do. So you might have some other flavor of USB or Thunderbolt, but basically something that connects directly to your Mac is what I'm going to call a local backup. Now, if I want to back up to another computer in my house or a hard drive that's connected to another computer in my house or a NAS appliance or the cloud or whatever, someplace where it's the connection between my Mac and the place where I'm backing up is over a network, then that's a network backup. But for the moment, we're going to leave the cloud out of this. We're just going to talk about the network within your home or office. So a local backup, you go buy an external hard drive or SSD. You can get a pretty decently sized external hard drive for in the neighborhood of $100 or £100, and you get a much smaller SSD for that price, but they're coming down. So even a 2 TB, 4 TB SSD has gotten to be affordable by mere mortals. And if you don't want to use a directly connected device, oh sorry, just say about your local devices. If you want the fastest possible backup, this is the way to get it, because something like a Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4 connection is almost definitely going to be faster than even the very fastest Wi-Fi network you can get. And it'll be cheaper than a network appliance. But if you are using one of these devices with multiple Macs, or if you're using it on a laptop and you're constantly unplugging it and replugging it, that could be less convenient. Now, what we have pictured here is a network attached storage or NAS device. There are countless thousands of these. There are many, many of them. What you have pictured here is the one I happen to have over in the corner. You can't see it, but it's over there. It's a Synology. NAS Synology is one of the major NAS manufacturers. And my model happens to have 4 hard drives in it. You can get ones with one hard drive or two or 5 or 12 or however many. And it basically has all the circuitry of a computer, but without a display. So you connect to this over your network, you configure it in a web browser, and your NAS device can store files. Not only can you use it for backups, you can also use it for file sharing within your family or your office. You can use it to hold videos that you'll stream to your smart TV. You can use it to run certain kinds of apps. I have just for fun, because I could do it, I downloaded a copy of the entire Wikipedia and put it on my NAS. So I can now access anything in Wikipedia on my local network, even if Wikipedia goes down or my entire internet connection goes down. I don't think I'll ever need to do that, but I mean, I thought, well, that's a thing I could do. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to try that. So compared to an external hard drive or SSD, network attached storage is going to be slower because of the network, but also because hard drives are very likely to be slower than, especially an SSD, and they're going to cost more. But where you make up for the cost is in versatility and convenience. So I have all of the Macs in my house, and I would have to use probably my fingers and toes to count all of them, but a lot. They are set up to use Time Machine to back up to my NAS. So wherever we are in the house, it just happens and nobody has to think about it. Um, don't have to unplug or replug anything or move anything around. It's very, very nice. Now, there are also ways to set up a Mac to function as a Time Machine server. So if you have an iMac or a Mac Mini or Mac Studio or Mac Pro that's going to just be there all the time and be on all the time, you can set it up with internal or external storage and get all of your other Macs to connect to that. I used to do that and I stopped because it was just too flaky and unreliable and it would keep not working. So for me, I prefer this approach. I prefer the NAS approach, but some people have had very, very good luck with a Mac functioning as a Time Machine server. So you're going to have to choose hardware, but you're also going to have to choose software. And actually, I will have the very next slide is a little more detail about what kind of hardware to choose. Throughout the next half hour or so, I'm going to be saying quite a bit more about software. But we'll start with the easiest. If you want simplicity, if you want the absolute least amount of effort to set something up, and also zero cost, use Time Machine. It's free. It comes with your Mac. It could take as little as 1 or 2 clicks to turn it on. It is the easiest way to back up your Mac. It's not perfect. It's not complete, but it is way better than nothing. And it is certainly the path of least resistance. If you need some features that Time Machine doesn't have, and we'll talk a bit about that later, you have lots of other images. Now I say Acronis True Image here. They've renamed it to Acronis like Cyber Protect Home Office or something weird. I don't know. But Acronis has backup software. Arc, ChronoSync, QRecall. There are tons of other backup Macs that will work on your Mac. And if you go to alt.cc/BA, as in backup appendixes, you'll see a table that has a feature comparison for a lot of different Mac backup tools. And I've tried them all. I have opinions, I have preferences, and I will talk about some of the things that I like, but I don't really care that you make the same choice that I made. I care that you choose something that you're comfortable with, something that you like that works well for you, and you use it. Whatever you choose something. Now, there's this program called Retrospect, which has been around since before I started using Macs. I got my first Mac in 1991, and Retrospect is older than that. So it's been around for a long, long time. And you can run a very basic version of Retrospect on a single Mac, and it's fine. You can also get more elaborate versions where from your Mac an administrator, you can control the backups for everyone in your family, everyone in your company. You can control tens of thousands of other Macs and PCs in terms of their backups and restoring. So you can actually restore a file for someone else rather than making them do the restoration. So if that's a thing that you need to do, Retrospect might be a good choice. I say it requires a propeller beanie because it's a little complex, but it's very, very powerful. Now, if you also want to make duplicates, which I have a lot of things to say about. You might use a tool such as Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper. They're really good at that. But as I say, there are some reasons that you might want to be circumspect about duplicates. If you happen to choose Carbon Copy Cloner because you want duplicates, you get version backups as a bonus. Carbon Copy Cloner can also make them. Now, it does it in a completely different way from Time Machine. So you'll have to live with its quirks for better or for worse, but it can do that as well. Again, if you want really detailed help choosing software, and what I tell you in the next little bit doesn't help, you can certainly go to that website, or you can look in the book. And I have a lot more information about backup software and the features you should look for. Now, in terms of hardware, just because you've decided that you're going to use an external hard drive, let's say, or a NAS device, you still have a lot of choices to make. Well, which model do I get? And what, you know, what are the details? So you want to think about capacity. Let's say that I have a terabyte of stuff on my Mac right now. Well, I don't want to get a terabyte hard drive to back it up onto, because very likely as time goes on, I'm going to take more pictures and create more files and download more stuff. And I need to have that new stuff backed up as well. So you want to give yourself some breathing room, more space on your backup volume than is currently occupied on your Mac. If you are backing up multiple computers to the same space, to the same device, you will need to add those in as well. As just a quick rule of thumb, plan on 1.5 times as much backup storage space as you are currently using. So again, like maybe I have a 2 terabyte SSD, but I'm only using 1 terabyte of it right now. I would say the very, very minimum I would want is 1.5 terabytes of storage for backups. More is okay. But I mean, 8 terabytes of backups or 10 for a computer that is only using 1 terabyte, that's excessive. That's overkill. It'll take you many years to fill that up, if you even ever do. You also want to think about speed. So for local storage, if your Mac supports Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4, then go get a Thunderbolt SSD or a Thunderbolt hard drive. If you get a USB 3, let's say a USB 3.0 hard drive, and you connect it to a Mac, I mean, you can do that. You might need to use an adapter in some cases, or depending on your Mac model, you might have a USB-A port on it that you can just plug it right in. Like, that'll work, but it'll be so much slower. So as a general rule, if you have a Mac with Thunderbolt, which you almost certainly do if you've bought your Mac within the last, I don't know, 7 years or so, use that. SSDs are great because they are way, 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 way faster to both back up to and restore from than a hard drive, but you are going to pay a lot more for equivalent storage. And if you are using a network appliance, you have to think about what kind of Wi-Fi you have. Do you need to upgrade your Wi-Fi router? Do you need to get a mesh network like Orbi or Eero? Do you need to get a range extender? Do you need something so that your throughput is higher so that backups happen in less time? And oh yeah, money. I mean, if I had unlimited money, I would have an all SSD NAS. I think I've got 4 like 10 terabyte hard drives in there. Um, I could replace all of those with SSDs, but it would be, tens of thousands of dollars. So, um, yes, you have to factor speed into it. Yes, you have to factor capacity into it, but you also have to do something that you can afford. That's okay with your budget. So, the first kind of backup that I want to focus on is version backups. Now, I've already mentioned versions in the sense of, Dropbox stores older versions and iCloud Drive does, and you have this versioning feature within some of your Mac apps. Version backups are like that with the addition that they are going to store deleted files as well. So basically, you back up your stuff, that goes into your backups. Next day comes around or the next hour. And in that period of time, you've deleted some things, you've added some things. Whatever is new, whatever is changed, that gets added to your backup. The next time, everything that is new gets added to your backup, but nothing gets deleted. That's what I'm talking about when I say a version backup. Time Machine does this. It's not the only way. We'll say more about Time Machine shortly. Whatever software you use is either going to say, tell me what I should back up, and you decide what goes in, or as Time Machine does, tell me what I should leave out. And then you can say, back up everything but this. I recommend backing up literally everything. You don't back up Mac OS itself, but all of the other stuff, all of your actual data. Don't pick and choose, well, I'm going to back up this folder, but not this folder. The safest thing is to back up everything because you just never know. So let's say a few words about Time Machine. It's free, it comes with your Mac, and it's pretty good. Now, if you go out and buy a new hard drive or SSD, take it out of the box, plug it into your Mac, first thing that's going to happen is a dialog is going to come up saying, hey, I see a new empty drive. Would you like me to use this for Time Machine backups? And if you do, you could just say, why, yes, thank you. And a couple of clicks later, you're done. And that's the end of the story. As long as that drive is connected, Time Machine will just run every hour. If you said no, now you want to change your mind, or for whatever reason you want to manually set up Time Machine, it's pretty easy, although you do have some options you can configure along the way. Go into System Settings. And in that list on the left, select General. And then there's a bunch of other categories, and you select Time Machine. Then you'll see what you now see on the screen. So how do you set up Time Machine? Really easy. First, make sure that the place you want to back up to is connected, whether it's over the network or physically plugged into your Mac. And then you click Add Backup Disk. This dialog is going to show you all of the destinations that your Mac can see that are valid for Time Machine. So this will include any locally connected drives that are available to Time Machine, properly formatted and so forth. It will include network volumes that are shared by another Mac in your house or office. It will include volumes on a NAS that have been set up for Time Machine. So you select the one you want to use, you click Set Up Disk. Now you have some things that you can optionally choose. If you don't want to do anything, you click Done and you're done. But you can turn on Encrypt Backup there at the top, and you can set a password. I recommend doing this because if someone breaks into your house, steals your computer, and they see, oh, well, there's a hard drive or an SSD sitting next to it, well, I'm going to grab that too because I could get some money for that. Well, if that had your backups on it and you didn't encrypt it, then all the data on that is available to the thief, right? So you're doing this to protect yourself in case of theft or some other sort of breach, that someone else gets access to the media that your backups are stored on. So I recommend filling that in. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't take longer as long as you set it up now. If you go back later, decide, oh, I didn't encrypt it, but now I'm kind of regretting that choice and now I want to encrypt it, you can. You can turn it on later, but it will then take a lot longer to encrypt all of that previously stored data. Could be hours or days as opposed to instant if you turn it on in the first place. You can also say, well, I have this really big external hard drive and I don't need to use all of it for Time Machine. Maybe I want to use some of it for other stuff. You can click Custom here and then use this slider at the bottom to specify how much of this external drive you want to use for Time Machine. So you do that, then you click done, and you're back to here. At this moment, you've done it. You've turned on Time Machine. Once an hour, it will run. The first time, it has to back up everything, so that's going to take a while. But after that initial backup, those hourly runs might take just a minute or two each, depending on how much data has changed in the meantime. And usually they happen, you don't even notice they're happening unless you happen to look at that little icon in your menu bar at the right time. They don't slow down your Mac, and they can happen very, very fast. There are a couple of other things you can configure. However, if you click Options, this shows up. And I want to point out three things here from bottom to top. There might be some things, either volumes like external volumes or particular folders, that for some reason you don't want to include in your Time Machine backups. If there are, you can click that plus icon at the bottom, select that item, and that'll be excluded. Now, you can do this if you don't have enough space on your backup drive, or if backups are taking much too long or something of that sort. But I really recommend not doing that, because if Time Machine is your only backup, and maybe it shouldn't be, but if it is, then anything you exclude from backups, you will not be able to retrieve again if your Mac is lost, stolen, destroyed in a fire, or whatever. Moving up from there, another thing you can optionally do if you have a laptop is turn on backup on battery power. I really do recommend that you do this, because backups don't take very much battery power. And if your Mac is on battery power most of the time and you only kind of plug it in at night or whatever, you're really going to want those backups during the day. But if you are having battery problems, you can turn that off. And then at the very top, backup frequency. If you really don't want to back up every hour, you can instead choose every day or every week, or manually, and you tell Time Machine exactly when you want it to back up. I definitely recommend automatic, because you're much more likely to get your backups done if you don't have to think about them. And uh, for really most people in most situations, every hour is the right choice. So even backing up with Time Machine, and you realize, oops, I've lost some data. I need to go back and find a file that I've deleted or an earlier version of the file. What do? You can go to your applications folder and find this Time Machine icon that's here on the left. And you can click that, or you can put it in your dock and click it in the dock, and it'll open the Time Machine app. Or you can go to your menu bar and find this icon. And when you click that, this little menu pops up, and you can choose Browse Time Machine Backups. Either way, what happens next is you get this sort of infinity mirror time travel display that looks, suspiciously almost exactly like the display from versions. It's the same thing. The only difference is in the versions display, you get the current version of the document on one side and the older versions on the other side. And in the Time Machine version, you only get whatever folder you happened to be in, whatever folder in the Finder was in the foreground when you click that icon or open that app. That's what you're going to see the older versions of. Well, if that's not the folder you want, you can just navigate around to a different folder. You can navigate around here just as you would in the Finder. You can click the spotlight icon and do a search for a file or a folder. You can do all the same things that you would normally on your Mac. When you get to the place where the thing should be, the thing that's missing now, or the thing that you need an older version of, you again use those same controls, the arrow buttons or the controls on the right-hand side, to select which backup you'd like to see. You go back to that state, you select the thing that you want to restore and click the restore button, back it comes, and Bob's your uncle. So that's the essence of Time Machine. Now, if you are using a locally connected disk, and yeah, you've got a laptop and you don't have that thing connected all the time, or you're using a NAS device, but that's at home and I'm now out. I'm not connected to the same network, so I can't do my network backups. There's a really cool feature in macOS called Time Machine Local Snapshots. And what this means is that even you have to have set up Time Machine, but once you've set it up, even if that destination volume is not available, your Mac will make an hourly and literally instantaneous, I call it a sort of backup. It's not really a backup because it's stored in the very same place as the original, but it's an extra snapshot, an extra copy. And to restore data from one of these, you use Time Machine. So let's say I've been out all day long. I've been out, I've had my laptop with me, I've been making files and changing files, and I realize, oh no, I accidentally deleted something that was there 2 hours ago, but I didn't have my Time Machine volume hooked up and I don't have my NAS available. What do I do? Well, you just turn on Time Machine the same way. You get that time travel display, and what it's going to show you is those local snapshots. So it's going to look exactly the same way as normal Time Machine does. It's just that the place it's going to get that data is right off of your SSD. Later on, when you do reconnect your Time Machine volume, it'll move that stuff over for you and you don't have to worry about it at all. It's all completely automatic. You can use not only Time Machine to access these things, you can also see snapshots in Disk Utility and certain other apps such as Carbon Copy Cloner. So here's Disk Utility. For example, I've selected my hard drive on the left and look down at the bottom, APFS snapshots. So I can scroll through here and see all the snapshots that have been recorded on my computer's SSD. And I can say, oh, well, this one right here, I want to open that up in the Finder, and that will just open it up in its own window, and you can browse through there and copy files as much as you like. So there are a bunch of other things you can do with Time Machine local snapshots, but I just wanted to give you the kind of quick overview here. Now, Time Machine is great for version backups, but if you need much more granular control, like I need to set up rules that if a file or a folder meets these criteria, then it's backed up, or if it meets these criteria, it's not backed up, or I need to protect a larger group of Macs or a group of computers that also includes Windows PCs. There are plenty of other tools, and I've mentioned these before. Retrospect is good for network stuff. Carbon Copy Cloner is good if you need duplicates, which we'll talk about in a moment. And you can go to alt.cc/BA to learn more about them. Now, usually when I get to this point in the talk, if I'm like in front of a live audience, hands go up and like, what? So I want to just mention a few of those things that I frequently get asked about now. So question number one, I use iCloud Photos. In Apple's Photos app, I've got iCloud Photos turned on. That means that I have a copy in the cloud of all the photos that are on my Mac in the Photos app. And they sync across my devices. That's great. It's super handy. So is that a backup? Is that enough? And I kind of say, kind of, sort of, maybe not really. So the same thing is true here as with all the different version things that I've talked about. If you delete a photo from Photos, then that photo is going to be deleted from the cloud too. Now, you can get it back if you think to get it back within 30 days. But if it's been longer than a month, you won't be able to retrieve that deleted photo. So if you're really, really, really running low on space on your backup drive, or backups are just taking such an enormously long time, or you have some other problem, like you can exclude your photos, but it never hurts to have an extra copy, especially for something as valuable as photos. Second question. You may know that ever since Apple switched over to the APFS file system back in Catalina, this sort of coincided with Macs ship with SSDs. There are some exceptions that you can still occasionally find a Mac with a Fusion drive, but APFS and SSD kind of go together. If you have ever tried putting Mac OS on an external hard drive, not an SSD, an external hard drive that is formatted as APFS, and booting off of that, which I have tried, it's just the worst. Oh, it is so slow. It might take you 10 minutes just to boot your Mac, and then you'll like click something and you wait, 30 seconds for that thing to select. And then you try to open something and it takes a couple of minutes for an app to open. Oh, it is so bad. It is so, so painful. APFS and SSD are a great combination, but APFS and mechanical hard drives are not. So the question becomes, does that mean that I can't store my time machine backup on a mechanical hard drive? I have to use an SSD for that too, right? No, 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 that's not what that means, because you're not booting from your time machine backup. This speed problem occurs only if you are booting from a mechanical hard drive. If you are only getting data off of it, it's fine. So no problem using a much cheaper hard drive as a time machine destination. Third question I get is, okay, so great, I'm using Time Machine or one of these other apps for version backups, and I'm done, right? I can close the book, I can turn off Zoom, I'm done. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to say probably no. There might be a couple of other things you should really, really seriously look into. The first of those things is offsite backups. Now, offsite just means not in the same place where you are. So if I'm backing up my work computer at work in my work office, and I had a second backup that I bring home, then from the perspective of my office, home is offsite. If I here in my home office have a second backup and I take that to work, then that's in a different place. Or I take it to a relative's house or something, take it somewhere else that's not in my house. That's an offsite backup. Offsite just means someplace else. And the reason you want an offsite backup is that if something happens to your house or office, there's a fire, a flood, a hurricane, theft, whatever, something happens to everything in your house and all of your backups were in your house, then all of your backups are gone. So you ought to have a secondary backup that isn't in the same place where your Mac is. Now, of course, you can just say, all right, well, I'm going to get a second external hard drive and I'll back up to that because, you can add an extra hard drive in Time Machine. It's true. You can add two or three more, as many as you want. And every hour, it'll just switch off to a different one. Say, okay, well, I've got two here, so I'm going to take one. I'm going to put it in a safe deposit box in the bank. And then every week or so, I'll go to the bank and swap that one out for the one that I was using at home. And so now I've got an offsite backup. I'm like, okay, yes, you can do that. People do. Man, it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of effort. And I think you can save yourself that effort by using an online service to back up your files to the cloud. Here are a couple that are pretty well known and pretty decent. Backblaze is what I use. iDrive is another pretty good one. There are others. Again, go to the backup appendixes online, and you can see details on others. You install some software on your Mac, pay, of course, the mandatory fee. It could be, the proverbial cost of a latte per month, let's say, something in that range. And all of your stuff is backed up to the cloud and it's versioned, so it makes a copy of everything and then it just backs up the new things. And you can look through those old versions and those deleted files and whatnot and download them from the cloud when disaster strikes. I like online backups because they are so much easier and more convenient than physically moving a backup someplace else. Not the only way to do it. You are going to pay a bit more for it, but I think it's a really excellent idea to not just have one backup, but to have at least two independent backups. The backup that's right here and the backup that's someplace else. But in fact, you might even want three. And the third backup, if you choose to do it, is a different sort of a backup. It's going to be a duplicate. Now, there are duplicates that are bootable and duplicates that are not bootable. So I want to walk you through what these are and why you may or may not choose to have these in addition to the other sorts of backups. So let's start with bootable duplicates. Here's the idea. I use a special tool to make a complete copy of literally everything on my Mac's startup drive. Everything, including Mac OS itself. That way, I can boot from that backup if I need to. And there are a bunch of tools that can make these Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper. You have to be very careful with your settings. They may not produce a bootable duplicate by default. Read the documentation or read my book. But if you configure them just so, they can make a bootable duplicate, a duplicate that you could boot your Mac from. Now, if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, everybody needs to have these. They are mandatory. They are non-negotiable. Bootable backups are the third leg of your backup strategy. They can't not be there. And my reasoning was very simple. I've had hard drives die on me. So if I'm using a Mac that has a hard drive and the hard drive dies, yes, I can replace the hard drive and then I can restore from a backup someplace onto that hard drive, but that might take me hours or days. In the meantime, I got to get my work done. So if instead, or while I'm waiting for the new hard drive to arrive or the time to actually do all that stuff, if instead I plug in a bootable duplicate, I can simply choose a different startup drive for my Mac, boot from the duplicate, and I'm right back to work instantly. Everything that was on my Mac is also on the duplicate. And I can just keep running from that until I've gotten around to replacing the hardware. And this is what I used to recommend. I don't really recommend that anymore. And on the one hand, bootable duplicates are less necessary than they used to be, but they're also less useful than they used to be. Not only that, but it's harder to make them and much harder to keep them updated. So this thing that used to be essential is now somewhere between optional and useless. So let me spell out, why is it less necessary? Well, for the first thing, Macs now all have SSDs as primary storage. SSDs are inherently a lot more reliable and less failure prone than mechanical hard drives. There's no heads to crash, there's no motor to fry, there's no, bearings to seize up. They're not going to be harmed by magnetic fields much. So they are more reliable. So that's one reason that bootable duplicates may be less necessary. We also now have recovery mode. Your Mac has two copies of Mac OS on it, the one you normally use and another kind of hidden mini version. You can boot into recovery mode and be running this very, very minimal version of Mac OS in which you can use disk utility to fix disk errors. You can reinstall all of Mac OS if you need to without damaging your data. It restores the operating system, but doesn't erase any of your stuff. If you need to, you can also use recovery mode to erase everything, reinstall Mac OS, and then use Migration Assistant to get your stuff back from a backup. So because you can both repair and reinstall Mac OS, as well as do these other sort of maintenance tasks in recovery mode, you don't need a bootable duplicate for that. When Apple switched about 5 years ago to the APFS file system, another reason for needing duplicates disappeared because APFS is a lot more reliable than HFS Plus or macOS Extended was. It is much less likely to encounter directory problems and lose data. So it's more reliable that way. And starting in Catalina, Apple separates macOS from all of your other data. So it is next to impossible for something that you do or something that malware does to you to put your SSD into an unbootable state. It's not impossible, but it's really, really difficult. Even if you have a bootable duplicate, it's going to be less useful because unlike a time machine backup, that duplicate has to go on an SSD. Otherwise, it won't be useful to you. Everything will be much too slow, and SSDs can be quite expensive. I have one SSD, this particular one here, that successfully boots my Mac, and I have another older one that doesn't. Like, I use Carbon Copy Cloner and it looks like everything works, but then when I try to boot from it, I just get nothing. So depending on what kind of SSD you have and phase of the moon and how the planets are aligned, it may or may not work. Also, you can't boot a Mac that has a completely dead SSD. So this is assuming you have an M series, Apple Silicon Mac. If the internal SSD completely dies, and I don't mean it just has some directory problems or something needs to be reinstalled, but if the entire storage device is non-functional, you can't even boot from an external SSD. That's because the built-in SSD has a little chunk of it that has some code that is needed to tell macOS how to boot from an external drive. So if your internal drive is completely toast, even having an intact bootable duplicate won't help. Plus, you can't use a duplicate created on an Intel Mac on an M series Mac or vice versa. Top it all off with the tools that you use to make bootable duplicates can't update Mac OS itself. So let's say I made a duplicate yesterday. But yesterday I was running Mac OS 14.4, and then after I made that duplicate, I updated to 14.4.1, and now I want to update my duplicate so that it's also got 14.4.1 on it. You can't do that. You can't use software like Carbon Copy Cloner or SuperDuper to update Mac OS itself. What you'd have to do is start up from the duplicate, and while running from the duplicate, run software update to update its version of Mac OS. It's much less convenient. If you're using an Intel Mac with a T2 chip, it can be done, but there's a lot of irritating extra steps you got to go through. See my book. Long story short, I think bootable duplicates have become more bother than it's worth, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make a data-only duplicate. So remember, your Macintosh HD behind the scenes is divided into two, and one part of that is just Mac OS, and that's not changeable by anything except for Apple's installer. The other part is everything else, all of your data and the apps that you've installed. So you can still use a tool like Carbon Copy Cloner, SuperDuper, ChronoSync, many other ones to duplicate just the data volume on your Mac, and that's a pretty great idea. It gives you all of your personal data, and although you can't boot from it as such, it's much easier to update because you don't have to jump through any hoops. You just run the backup software again. You don't have to put it on an SSD either, but if you did put it on an SSD, then what you could do is, after the fact, install macOS on top of your existing data on that data only duplicate and turn it into a bootable duplicate. It's a kind of a weird, somewhat fragile procedure, but you could do that if you wanted to. Even if all I have is a duplicate of my data volume, I can still use Migration Assistant to move all that data to a new Mac or a new drive if the need arose. But if I'm going to do that, if that's my end goal, I could also just use Time Machine instead, as long as I haven't excluded anything from the Time Machine backups. So bootable duplicates, just don't bother. A data only duplicate could be a great supplement, but for most of us, most of the time, they probably aren't necessary. When you lose data, not if, when you lose data, something is missing or something is corrupted or something is wrong, you got to know how to get it back. And I showed you how to do that with Time Machine. Whether you're using something else like Backblaze or whatever tool you're using, getting just the most recent version of a file or a few files pretty easy. You just go into that and copy it over. Oh, what if I go into my backups and my backup drive has died? Or data is corrupted on it, or whatever. It happens. That's why you have a second backup. Then you go to the second backup. If it's not just a file or a folder or a few files, you have to restore the entire Mac. First of all, make sure Mac OS itself is intact. And if it's not, you might have to reinstall that in recovery mode. If you've done that and most of your stuff is in cloud storage using iCloud Drive, Dropbox, something of that sort, you just wait and those files will repopulate. They will reappear all on your own. Once that's done, you can use Time Machine or a bootable duplicate or a data only duplicate or setup assistant or migration assistant to get all the rest of the stuff back. And that could take a few hours. Just really quickly, if you had to do a complete erase and restore from a backup, you go into System Settings, into General, into Transfer or Reset. Click this very, very scary button. Make sure you have multiple backups first. And then once it is erased, you will be able to, the setup assistant will show up automatically. That will walk you through the process of migrating from a backup. So a few final thoughts. Don't just assume that because I'm using Time Machine or Retrospect or whatever it might be, and it looks like my backups have been running, that they definitely did run and all my data is safe. Stuff goes wrong and you aren't always informed if stuff has gone wrong. So, International Verify Your Backups Day is every Friday the 13th. Okay, so when the next Friday the 13th rolls around, people are going to be saying things about, be careful and stuff is going to go wrong and what have you. That's your reminder. Oh, yes, I should check the battery in my smoke detector. And also, oh, yes, I should test my backups. Hook up your backups and try to restore a few files. Make sure they're really there. Make sure you really know how to get them back. You have that experience. So when something goes wrong for real, it's much easier for you. And if something has gone wrong in the backup process, you fix it before it's too late. So don't leave anything to chance. Set up backups, test your backups. And if you decide that you want to do something totally different from what I've recommended, first of all, you're probably wrong. I hate to say you're probably wrong, but you're probably wrong because, boy, I've been studying this stuff for like 20 years, and I'm really confident in my advice. I think this really does give you the best trade-off between security and ease of use. But if you've decided, no, I have a better idea, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this and this, what I want you to do is challenge yourself. Okay, when you lose data, exactly how do you get it back? Don't just think actually try it. I've had people say, well, I made a backup and then I made a backup of my backup. And then my first backup died. So I wanted to get my backup from the backup of the backup, but I couldn't, but I could, but it didn't work because sometimes putting too many links in the chain just screws stuff up. So whatever weird scheme you've come up with that isn't my scheme, okay, but pretend that you've lost some files or, access to your entire Mac, walk through how you would get it back yourself. That's the only way that you can know that it'll actually work. Of course, I think you ought to buy my book. It's 30% off, as all of our books are for our lovely user group members. And I hope you will take note of that code, pick it up. It has way, way more detail than I could cover today, even though I talked a lot longer than I usually do. And I think you'll find it very, very valuable. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take a few more drinks and ask if there are any questions.
Joe, you've obviously been incredibly thorough, because there are no questions in chat. A comment from Liz, who just says, "Hi Joe, I use Carbon Copy Cloner, but it won't make a bootable copy. I'm running Sonoma, but by the sound of it,
Yeah,
you guys should
there's a
start a club."
there's a special procedure you have to go through. It's hidden. You have to, like, I have directions in my book, and you can find directions in the Carbon Copy Cloner documentation. But I want to be clear about this. If you've used Carbon Copy Cloner and you have a data only duplicate, and then later you decide, no, I want to make it a bootable duplicate, you can't. You have to let Carbon Copy Cloner completely erase the drive in order to do the stuff it needs to do to make it bootable.
Okay, thank
So
you.
there is a process to do it. You can do it, but it requires starting off with erasing everything.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Brilliant.
You're very well.
Excellent talk. Fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ferraz, I think you're next on the list. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I've got the backup religion. I do time machine, multiple backups. I had a problem with shortcuts. I've been doing some tidying up, and stuff started falling over because I deleted a shortcut that I rely upon. And I thought, how do I get it back? Luckily, I had a bootable clone, so I disconnected my Mac from the internet, booted up the bootable clone, got the shortcut up, printed it, and then recreated it. I didn't know what else to do. And one other thing, I use ChronoSync to do my bootable backups, and I found that doing an incremental backup of that will update the operating system. I was surprised. That was true on Ventura. I haven't tried it on Sonoma.
I try it. Try it, and if it works, please write to me, because that would be a mystery that I would like to solve. As far as I am aware, that shouldn't be possible.
Yes.
So that would be quite interesting if true. It's very interesting that you brought up shortcuts. So shortcuts is not the only app that has this problem. Any sort of app, and we're usually talking about Apple apps, where data is not stored as individual files, can potentially give you a backup problem. So a great example is Notes. And somebody brought this up. They said, okay, but Notes is just there's a hidden database someplace that has, what if I delete a note and I need to get back my notes, or one specific note? How do I do that? I was like, oh, oh wow, that's hard, because that data is stored locally but synced to the cloud, synced to all of your other devices, and Apple does not give you any mechanism to go back and get a specific note. And so I wrote about that in the latest version of the book, and there are some really complicated things you can do, like, if you use iMazing to back up your iPhone or iPad. You can pull individual notes out of that. Sometimes there's like stuff you can do, but it requires a lot of complicated, contortions, and it's a problem. So there are preventive measures you can take, but short of saying, okay, I have a backup of everything, I'm going to wipe everything and restore from the backup, but I'm going to do it without my network turned on, because if the network is, if it's connected to the network, then as soon as you restore from the backup, it's going to say, oh, let me go ahead and update these notes with the latest version from the cloud, which is missing, this particular note. And it's exactly the same with shortcuts. Apple wants to be helpful by automatically syncing. Even if you restore from a backup, they want to sync everything from the cloud, but if your goal is to get back something that's missing, Apple makes it harder. So that it's a problem.
Thank you. Ward, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Well, you've discouraged me from doing bootable backups, which I've been doing for possibly decades. But I'm wondering, on my carbon copy cloner backup right now, do I need to make any change if I'm going to change to the model of just data only backup?
So the default behavior in Carbon Copy Cloner, if you have made a bootable duplicate, is as soon as that's done, it then automatically switches to data only updates. So the default behavior is like, if I made my bootable duplicate with, macOS 13.3 or something, and I keep running that process over and over again, it's going to keep updating the data portion of my disk, but it's just going to leave the macOS part alone. Now, we heard just a minute ago, maybe ChronoSync has some fancy way around that, which I can't wait to look into. But it's fine to just sort of leave the macOS portion of your bootable duplicate there. It's not doing any harm. It just might not be doing you any good either.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sheeta, you have questions.
I do. Hi, Joe. How are you doing?
Hi, good.
All right. My question involves the Time Machine local snapshot, because this thing gave me fits a couple of weeks ago. And actually, I ended up turning Time Machine off because you have so many things that start eating into your hard drive space. I try to keep a minimum of 200 gigabytes free because you got so many apps that want to use it. And I usually have like 15 apps running at a time. So what happened is that the Time Machine's local snapshots started eating into my hard drive space to a point where I had 50 gigabytes left. And I looked at my space left and I screamed. It's like, how did that happen? And so I eventually talked to, one of my gurus, and they suggested that maybe it was the Time Machine local snapshots. And it was. And I realized or found out, or they gave me instructions on how to delete those. Is there a way to stop those from happening?
I am not aware of a way to stop them from happening. I'm going to make myself a note to look into that. But
Because, go ahead.
What is supposed to happen is that when you later reconnect your Time Machine destination drive, that it's going to shift stuff over there and then delete the local snapshots. But as recently as like 2 days ago, Glenn Fleischman wrote an article on 6 colors about.
I read it. Yep.
Okay, so it's for those of you who haven't read this article, one of Glenn's kids came to him and said, like, I can't delete anything off of my Mac because the disk is completely full. And Glenn's like, oh, come on, You just drag something. No, dragging to the trash doesn't work. We'll use terminal to, no, that doesn't work. And he tried all of his tricks to delete files, but it had filled up absolutely completely because of Time Machine local backups. And like there was just sort of a quirk in timing of something was being downloaded and the backups were being made. And it feels like a sort of a relatively rare case that Apple hasn't entirely thought through. But the upshot is that your disk can become so full that it is literally not even possible to delete files anymore to make more space. So I really hope that Apple addresses this in some way. But in the meantime, you do want to kind of keep an eye on your total disk space usage. And if you go into disk utility and select your disk, there will be a list of the local snapshots down there at the bottom, and you can just manually delete any that you want to delete.
Okay, so this is what happened. I keep Time Machine connected all the time. So they were Time Machine was automatically only deleting these snapshots 24 hours after they were created. So
Okay.
I had a whole day of snapshots. And like I said, my Time Machine is connected all the time. So the process where Time Machine is supposed to actually just copy it to the external drive was not happening. And it was also not allowing me to delete some of them. So if it was less than 24 hours, I could not delete them at all.
Well, that's
So,
weird, and I don't have an explanation for it. You might want to consider just throwing away your computer and reading a book
great.
instead. I mean,
Not going to happen. Yeah. All right. So we're hoping Apple will fix that. My next question is about Time Machine as well, and I'm wondering if this is a quirk or if it's just what's happening. I used to be able to see and access from Time Machine maybe a year or a year and a half worth of Time Machine snapshots.
okay.
It seems that with a new major update, I'm no longer able to see that far back in time. Is it me, or is it something that's might be going on that's stopping me from accessing, let's say, the latest OS versus something that I was able to access with the previous latest OS?
I'm not aware of anything like that. I mean, what I have seen happen is Time Machine tries to verify stuff in your backups, and it encounters some error that it can't overcome, and it puts up a thing saying, "Oh, we can't verify your backups anymore, so we're just going to start again from scratch." Okay, like that has happened to me a couple of times. It's thankfully pretty rare, but it's not unheard of. But aside from that, Time Machine just deciding to forget about old backups is not a thing that I've encountered. So I don't know. I don't know what would trigger that.
All right. Thank you.
Shooter.
All my questions answered. All right.
Joe, we've got 2 questions and 2 statements really left. Are you happy to carry on a little over the hour?
Sure. Let's go for it.
Thank you very much. And guys, respectfully, could I ask you not now to post any further questions, because in fairness to Joe, he has a day to attend to. And I'm not. Anne asks if the coupon code is active, but it's the same code that you've used forever, isn't it? So
yeah,
and Anne just says when I tried to update my copy of the book, it said the coupon wasn't active.
Well, here's the thing. If you already own the book and you want a newer version, a newer version is available at a discount, and the discount is cheaper than this coupon code. So that's what would be going on, is we're trying to give you the cheaper upgrade price.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Billy McKee, fire away.
Thanks for that, Joe. It's always useful to hear the same message more than once, and you do it at a nice pace. A couple of things that come up. I've got, like Cheetah, I've got time machine hanging out of every machine. But one of the things I noticed, well, there are two things. One is that I open the laptop up every couple of days, and sometimes it'll be a gigabyte at a time coming down, sometimes two. But that's pretty constant. It's not as if I haven't done it for 3 days or it's the beginning of the month and it's starting to do a complete backup. It just seems to be fairly constantly the high volumes of data that are being backed up on an hourly basis.
And are you, I mean, are you creating or updating a lot of files during this time?
No, all the data files are off on an SSD. I've got photos off on a pair of SSDs out the back because you can't afford SSDs at the price raw files consume them. And I've got them partly as a security issue on a pair of SSDs hanging out the back. That's the only big data. The rest of it's fairly modest. But
Do you ever use virtual machines like Parallels Desktop or VMware Fusion or something like that?
No, I haven't got
Okay.
any of that. It's just a straightforward. This one is a 10. This one's a 12.7 laptop, and it just seems to be fairly constant. 1 to 2 terabytes a time or gigabytes a time, and I'm thinking, God almighty.
I mean, that does seem
information
excessive
enough.
to me. A thing you ought to know about Time Machine, and not all backup apps work this way, but Time Machine will not back up just the portions of a file that change. It will back up the whole thing.
Yep.
There are some backup apps that will say, oh, well, you have a 10 gigabyte file, but only 2K changed, so we're just going to back up the 2K. But Time Machine isn't like that. If any file changes, then it has to back up the whole thing again. So this may not be what you're experiencing, but certainly some people do experience the fact that Time Machine seems to be doing a lot of work for very small changes. That's because it has to back up every changed file in its entirety. There is there's a third-party program you can buy called Backup Loop. Just Google Backup Loop and you'll find it. And it's it's a commercial app, but it's not very expensive, and it can give you a lot greater insight into exactly what files Time Machine has backed up in each of its runs. It gives you way more information than Time Machine itself does, because Time Machine just says, well, I'm working on it, or I'm cleaning up. Okay, now I'm done. And that's all it tells you. So you can't really see precisely which files it touched. And so something like that could help you to identify what might be occupying all that data. Or it could be a Time Machine bug too. I mean, there are Time Machine bugs.
The second bit that I wrote in the questions was that when Time Machine backs up to a hard disk, when the hard disk is getting full, it's supposed to delete the oldest copies. That doesn't seem to work. It just fills up and stops. And this is 12.6 or 12.7, that level. Any
Have you been
thoughts on that?
hanging
Nope.
out with Sheeta? Because I feel like these behaviors that I'm hearing are not the way it's supposed to work, and they're not what I have seen.
Oh, I understand.
And I don't have an explanation for them. It could be a bug. It could be like, I really don't know. These are very, complex tools, and sometimes they don't do the right thing. I haven't heard of that specific thing happening before, and I'm sorry to hear of it.
You just
But yeah, but I don't have an explanation or a solution offhand, I'm afraid.
Billy, Ward has just kindly put the web address for Backup Loop in the chat, so you might want to grab that.
Okay.
Who's next on the list? John Cook. It's just a statement really, but about lost shortcuts. Would you like to just unmute and just share that with our members? John?
Yeah, just to comment that it is possible to export a shortcut from the Shortcuts app. So rather than printing it out and retyping it, you could have exported it onto a USB stick and then re-imported it back into your main version of your OS. It saved a bit of typing and a bit of paper.
Wonder if you could make a shortcut that exports all your shortcuts. And then you put that on a schedule and you just let it run. I mean, this seems like a real like gap in Apple's system, but yeah. Great idea though. Export stuff that you can't, make a habit of exporting stuff that can't easily be atomically retrieved from a backup.
Thank you very much. Oh, final question of the evening, I think. Janice, before you speak, can I just mention to Billy that Ferris has also dropped web address for eclecticlight.co. It's about time machine stuff. That's in chat. We all know how to save chat, don't we? Just tap on the ellipsis, the little 3 dots at the top of the chat column, and there's an option there to save the chat to your desktop. And finally, Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating, and I've learned a lot. The only trouble is I'm such a dinosaur with all of this that half of it I didn't really understand, even the terminology. So I'm hoping that your book might give a very kind of like simple introduction to a lot of, and then take it onwards to a more sophisticated level. But what I wanted to mention now was I have what I call backup box, which is, I think it's a Seagate, and I just have to plug that in to my MacBook Air, and then I have to make sure that the MacBook Air is connected to the electricity as well. Now it's telling me that every time I go to back it up again, it says it didn't back up properly last time because you weren't connected to the electricity. And it's only just started doing that in the last few weeks. I just wondered why. Do you know why it would say that? I mean, have I now got a bug in the backup box? Or I know the electricity is working okay because the light turns on at the same time. So any suggestions?
So does the Seagate drive have its own independent power adapter, or is it drawing power from your Mac?
Good question. I just plug it in. So that's what I mean. I am such a dinosaur that I don't really understand how it's working. So I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I'm doing what I've always done, and it's only just recently that it started saying they connect it to the Mac Air with a little connector that Mike told me about. Mike, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of those little connector things that you have to use when you're connecting two different pieces of kit together.
Oh, hub.
You yeah. No, not hub. I don't call it a hub. It's called something else. But anyway, the point, I suppose, is what is going wrong. That's what I'm trying to understand. And have I actually backed it up or not? I don't even know whether I've backed it up or not.
I don't know is the honest answer. I can think of reasons that you would get that sort of behavior if it were happening all along. But if you're using the same adapters and the same cables and the same setup and the behavior suddenly changed, that's a mystery to me. It could indicate a bug in a newer version of Mac OS, or it could indicate that the drive is starting to fail. What I would probably do is contact the manufacturer of the drive and see if there was an FAQ on their website, or if they have an email support address or something of that sort, and explain the symptoms and ask if what they think you should do. But without being there in person and being able to check some things, I don't know.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
At least
You're welcome.
Can we squeeze in? Can we squeeze in half a question? Jill
Okay.
Patton, can I speak for you? Jill Patton earlier said, I recently had a time machine bug, and she says, I had a message saying disk not ejected properly. Eject time machine backup before disconnecting or turning it off. I was doing neither. Thoughts?
I get those too.
Okay.
I see them even with network backup. So what is supposed to happen is time machine's getting ready to run is like, oh, well, I need to go make sure I mount this external volume or this network volumes. And then it does that. And then it does its thing. And then when it's done, it unmounts it. That's the way it's supposed to work. But I have seen cases where, let's say my Mac was asleep and I wake it up and I get these messages, exactly what you said, the backup volume was disconnected improperly. And what that tells me is that something caused the volume to unmount when it wasn't quite ready to. And I don't know what that thing was. I don't know if that's a bug in Mac OS or there was some loss of a network connection or a cable got jiggled, or I don't really know. I have seen this. I don't see it all the time. I've seen it occasionally. And it's really annoying because it's scolding you, right? It's saying, you're supposed to drag the thing to the trash before you unplug it, right? And the reason you're supposed to do that is that if your Mac is in the process of writing data to an external drive, when you unplug it, then a file will not be written in its entirety and you'll have some kind of error. Whereas if you tell it, okay, unmount this first by dragging it to the trash, then it stops all of those write operations. Then you can disconnect it safely. So basically that message is saying, you shouldn't have done that, but you didn't do anything. It was not your fault. Something caused that volume to unmount when it wasn't quite ready. And like I say, it's not your fault, but I couldn't tell you what is causing that.